So last week we started this series on service, and kind of to give you guys an overarching view of where we're headed this month as we talk about service. Last week we talked about this idea of service and how Jesus views service. And Jesus said that we are at our greatest when we are serving other people. And last week we talked about how we try to shout our own greatness and we try to prove ourselves. And Jesus says, if you want to be great, if you want to have greatness, if you want to be great, then lower yourself, lift other people up, and serve those that are often overlooked. And so that was kind of Jesus' view of service. This week we're going to look at what service does for us. And next week we're going to look at how service impacts other people. And so kind of to give you an overview of where we're headed. But tonight we're going to focus on this idea of what does service do for us? Have you ever been completely caught off guard by a change in perspective? Movies have a great way of doing this to us. I remember August of my 8th grade year. So that was a long time ago, 1999, August of 1999. I was in 8th grade. A movie came out called The Sixth Sense. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of this movie. How many of you know this movie? You've heard of it? Okay, a few of you. How many of you just know, it's been referenced numerous times, the classic line, I see dead people? How many of you have at least heard that line? All right, more of you. Okay, all right. So this was a movie that was absolutely huge in 1999. It took the world by storm. I'm going to give you just a brief premise because perspective changes everything. And so here's the way this movie works. So it's about this therapist right here, played by Bruce Willis, and this little kid played by Haley Joel Osment. And in this movie, Bruce Willis is a child therapist that is trying to help this little boy because this little boy is struggling. And it comes out partway through the movie that this little boy has all these different struggles, like he's struggling at school, he's struggling at home. He has all these different struggles because, as the famous line says, he sees dead people. And this therapist is like, oh, okay, that's kind of odd. And at first the therapist thinks the boy is hallucinating and thinks this is not really possible. But eventually the therapist is like, all right, I believe you. Where do we go from here? And the therapist and the boy come together and they make a plan that this boy is seeing dead people so that he can help them finish a task before they move on to whatever's next. All right, that whole different theological side sermon there, but for the sake of perspective, Bruce Willis believes this boy. They help dead people so that they can finish their task to move on to what's next. Bruce Willis has something else going on in his life. This therapist is also struggling in his marriage because his wife is completely ignoring him. She's cold, she's distant, he can't get anywhere. He's trying to talk to her, but it's just going nowhere. And then the writer, the director of this movie did something that blew everyone's minds back in 1999. The movie takes a twist and ends kind of back where it started, and you learn, spoiler alert, if you want to see the movie that is ridiculously old, he was dead the whole time. Crazy. Bruce Willis, the therapist, was dead the whole time. And then they go back and they start to show other scenes from the movie. There are scenes where, like, you thought Bruce Willis was talking to his wife. Well, Bruce Willis was the only one talking. His wife was not reciprocating. The whole movie, you thought it was because his wife was angry, he was working too much, stuff was going on. It was none of that. It was because he was dead. He was never there in the first place because he's a ghost. And the reason the little boy sees the therapist is because he sees dead people. And so the little boy helps the therapist helps the little boy. At the end, the therapist is able to finish his business with his wife and tell her that he loved her, and they all move on. But this flip in perspective radically changed the way you viewed the movie. I will never forget watching that movie and going back and being like, oh, see, I thought this, but it really meant this. I thought that the therapist was talking to the little boy's mom in one of the opening scenes. Turns out the little boy was walking to a room with just his mom present, but the therapist was just sitting there as a dead person. That's why the boy looked a little awkward when he walked in the room and saw Bruce Willis sitting there, because he's dead. Crazy. And everything changes when our perspective changes. Perspective changes the way we view things. Perspective changes the way we view things. And perspective, when we change our perspective, or we allow situations to change our perspective, it changes the way we live our lives. And so why am I telling you all this about perspective? Because in the book of John, Jesus flips the perspective for the disciples. I got to share with you what's going on in this passage. Jesus and the disciples have just walked from one town to another. Keep in mind, this is a time period over in the Middle East where it's very dusty, and they would walk and they were wearing flip-flops. So it was common practice that when you had a community meal, when you had a group of people together, that when you would enter the room, there would be a servant there, and that servant would wash your feet. Now, this was just common practice, and it was kind of important because when we think of sitting down and having a meal together, we think of sitting down and eating like this. Well, that's not the way that people ate in biblical times. So the way that people ate in biblical times is, you may have heard the term, they would recline at the table. So what that meant is there would be a table out here, and they would lay like this and then would eat like this. So you're sitting here eating, or like this eating, and there's another person sitting here eating. So it was probably pretty important for your feet to be clean for when you went to stand up and you've got a dirty foot right where your hands are going when you get up and lay back down to eat when you're reclining at the table. It was just a common practice that was pretty important at that time. And so the disciples walk into this dinner that was going to be, that we now know as the Last Supper with Jesus. And the disciples walk in, and now this is all from my own mind, okay? Like I like to try to imagine filling in the gaps of different Bible stories. And so I'm going to fill in the gaps, but keep in mind, this is just me filling in the gaps, my own self. So take it with a grain of salt. But here's what I imagine happening. I imagine the 12 disciples walking into this room, and they take a step in, and nobody's there to wash their feet. And they're like, something should be happening right now. Like, so where's the servant? Where's the guy that's my feet, like dusty, dirty, sweaty, gross. And I imagine them walking in and like kind of looking at each other, and they're like, come on, like this is just normal practice. And I wonder if some of them were like they turned to each other like, seriously? Like, there's not even a servant here to wash our feet? And I wonder if there was this moment where they kind of looked at each other, and one of them looked at the other like, are you going to wash feet? Dude, that's not my job. I'm not washing feet. I've seen your feet. Your feet are disgusting. There's no way I'm touching your feet, right? And I wonder if there were all these conversations and the disciples were had this awkward moment. And I wonder, and I know I'm filling in the gaps here, but I wonder if the disciples walked in the room and keep in mind, Jesus has entered Jerusalem. He knows that his kingdom is an eternal kingdom. We view this entire scene from the perspective of Jesus died and then rose from the dead. His kingdom was eternal. But the 12 guys walking with Jesus into this room assumed at this point this was an earthly kingdom. And so I wonder if they walked into this room and they were like, you have got to be kidding me. We're with the future king. Does no one recognize how important we are? Like you couldn't even provide a servant to wash our feet? And so what happens is everybody walks in and they just recline at the table. Dirty feet and all. Nobody gets up, nobody washes feet, nobody offers to wash feet. Everybody just is like, you know what? If we're not going to have a servant wash our feet, if that's the way it is, I'm just going to recline at the table anyway. And you got to imagine they're reclining there at the table, and I'm sure they've all looked at each other like, are you going to wash? No, I'm not going to wash. I'm not going to wash their feet. And then Jesus stands up. And you got to wonder what's going through their minds as he gets up and he walks over to the basin of water and he wraps a towel around himself and they're just like, I was going to do that. Like, I was going to get up and wash feet. You're the future king. You should not be washing our feet. Where's the servant? Is there a servant around? I knew I should have gotten up. And I should have been the first one to step up and wash their feet. And Jesus, the king, the future king that they think is earthly, the future king that is so much larger than earthly, it's an eternal king, gets up, takes off his outer garment, wraps a towel around him, and washes the disciples' feet. A nasty, awful job. Jesus serves his disciples. And I can't help but think in that moment, the disciples had a flip of perspective in one sense, and Jesus intentionally was starting a flip of perspective that would last years into their future lives. Jesus says this, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments, he resumed his place at the table. And he said to them, do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Ouch. And suddenly they walk in going, dude, it's not my job to wash each other's feet. Man, I should have been the one washing the other guy's feet. He says, for I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Blessed are you if you do them. You see, for Jesus, this moment was about so much more than just proper cleanliness. And it was about so much more than just what was expected or common courtesy. For Jesus, this was about a flip in perspective. See, humble service was supposed to be a vital part of the future of Jesus' disciples. Jesus knew that humble service, he knew that the way that they love one another, in a future verse he says, they'll know you're my followers by the way you love each other, by the way you love other people. And he knew that humble service was the thing, the love that they expressed through the way that they serve others was the thing that was going to go out and change the world. And so he wanted to start here, and he wanted to say, listen, you walked into this room thinking, all right, where's the servant that's going to wash my feet? And when you step out into the world, a few days later, when you recognize that I've risen from the dead, and this is so much bigger than you ever imagined, and you step out into the world to share the message, don't step out into the world thinking, I'm so incredible, someone should be washing my feet. Step out into the world saying, whose feet can I wash? And oftentimes, we need a flip in our perspective. You see, for Jesus, serving leads to greatness in his kingdom. But Jesus also recognized that when we serve, when we truly flip our perspective from the start and begin serving, that service is going to change our perspective for the rest of our lives. That we will begin living differently. We will begin viewing people differently. We will begin serving differently if we can recognize that we did not come to serve, to be served. We did not come to be served, but we came to serve. A shift in our perspective is needed from going, who's going to serve me, to how can I be of service to other people? You know what happens when our perspective changes? When our perspective changes, everything that had to deal with that perspective radically changes. I can remember watching The Sixth Sense, and I remember watching it, and I was going to show clips, but we have some younger people in the room, and I thought that might absolutely terrify them, and so I decided against that. But when I watched the end of the movie, I can remember going back, and it just changed the way that I viewed the entire movie. It changed the way that I viewed every conversation that Bruce Willis had with every single character in the movie. Everything about the movie was completely and radically different because my perspective had changed. And when we change our perspective, and when we allow service to change our perspective, everything that service impacts will begin to change. And service impacts us in some big ways. You see, because when we serve other people, it's not just about us and the way we view ourselves, which it does change our perspective for how we view ourselves. We begin to view ourselves as someone that can build others up rather than someone that can be built up by others. And we view ourselves as someone that can go and lift others up and help others in need and see ourselves as less important than other people. But it also changes the way that we view ourselves, and it changes the way that we view other people. Because suddenly we begin to see people as people that are valuable enough to be served. We begin to see people as people that are valuable enough to be loved by God. We begin to see people as people that we can go out and we can build up and we can show God's love to, and we can allow God to change them through the way that we serve them. And it's a total flip on perspective. It's a total change in perspective. And for Jesus, I am convinced that when Jesus stood up and began to wash his disciples' feet, he recognized that he was doing two huge things. He was flipping the disciples' perspective in the moment, but he was setting an example that service, when we truly serve other people the way God intended, he was saying, I've set this example so that your perspective, years from now, sitting right here in FCC, watching online, when you go out and you serve other people, your perspective can be flipped. You see, what it does to us, what service does to us, is it flips our perspective. Jesus made some huge claims about service. Jesus says, if you want to be great, serve. And he says, listen, you go out and you serve, you are going to be great. Maybe not in the way the world views you, but in the way that God views you, you are going to be great. And we can be great when we go serve. Jesus also said this. He said at the end of this, blessed are you if you do these things. Blessed are you if you do these things. When we go serve people, we are blessed. When we go serve people, when we begin to serve other people and we begin to look around and find ways to serve them on a daily basis, we are blessed. Now, I'm not saying this. Listen, hear me very clearly. Jesus' claims about service for greatness and blessing are not this. That if I go serve someone today, I'm going to be super popular and I'm going to receive all these things that I want. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying that it's much larger than anything we could ask or imagine in this world. That if we go out and we serve, yes, we are going to be great. We are going to be great in the eyes of God and in the eyes of Jesus. And when we go out and we serve other people and we begin to recognize how important other people are, and we begin to recognize that it's not all about us, we are going to be blessed. But here's what I'm convinced of. Those blessings will come in ways that we don't expect. They will come in ways of peace in difficult times. They will come in ways of just gratitude to God for being able to be a part of his story. They will come in ways of looking back over your life and saying, I used to live like this and my perspective used to be like this, but when I began to serve, everything changed. And guys, I can tell you that perspective can flip in a moment, and perspective can be a long game. And service can do both. There are times where I look back on my life and I think about mission trips that I've gone on and things that I've seen on those mission trips. And I think about coming back from those mission trips and I look at where I was before and where I was after, and I'm like I saw the world from a different perspective, but I didn't really change the way I lived my life necessarily. And I'm disappointed by that. And there was not a huge in-the-moment shift. But I think what Jesus is saying here is that we live in a society in America where we expect that immediate change. And Jesus is saying here, I've set you an example. Play the long game. Because I can tell you guys, I can look back over a life of service, and while I may not have been changed immediately by the 1-week mission trip, I can tell you that my life is different now than it was when I was in college because of the way that I serve other people, because of the way that I serve my family, because of the way that service has allowed me to view myself that I am not perfect and I don't have it all together and I don't have everything figured out and I'm not the most important person in the room. And that is a huge blessing that my perspective has now shifted and changed. And so the big question is this. Let me just get down to it. How do we start to change our perspective? How do we start to change our perspective? And here's what I would say. I would say this. Don't expect it immediately. It's a process, so start small. Don't expect it immediately. It's a process, so Start small. And here's where the practical challenge comes in. Because if you want to begin to change your perspective, don't go out and plan some huge, massive event where you're serving in a huge, massive way. Here's what I want you to do. And this is the practical challenge for this week. Go out and intentionally, every day this week, serve someone in a small way. At least once a day, serve someone in a small way. Hold a door open for someone that you would normally just kind of walk through the door and let it shut. Help someone that dropped their stuff. If you are on an athletic team and you are an upperclassman and you are typically the person that's like, all right, I'm a senior, a freshman, go clean up all the stuff. Be the senior that says, hey, I'm going to go help you clean up. And every day this week, just once a day. If you can do it more, great, but once a day. Start small. Intentionally serve someone around you. Because it's going to begin to shift your perspective. And trust me, the perspective that Jesus wants you to have about yourself and about others is so much greater than the perspective that the world wants you to have about yourself and about others. And so this week, I want to encourage you to go out, and I want to encourage you to intentionally serve someone in a small way every day this week. Let me pray, and then the band can come on up. God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for the chance to be here. God, I thank you for the chance to serve and be a part of your story. And God, I thank you for the chance, God, that you would just trust us to build your kingdom. God, I thank you for changing our perspectives. I thank you for allowing us to be viewed the way you would have us viewed. And God, I just lift up this group to you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.